All right, so today we're going deep on some pretty fundamental stuff.
Okay.
You know those documents that basically set the stage for American democracy?
Yeah.
The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights?
Big ones.
We're working from a modern paperback edition,
Right.
which might sound a bit dry,
Yeah.
but trust me, this stuff is anything but.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
It's easy to think of these as dusty old relics, but they're more like a live wire,
Ooh,
Still crackling with energy centuries later.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so first up,
Okay.
the Declaration of Independence,
Right.
America's big breakup letter with Britain.
Right.
But there's obviously a lot more to it than just saying, see ya.
Exactly. The Declaration does a really clever thing.
Hmm.
It simultaneously declares independence and lays out a vision for a whole new kind of government.
Okay.
One, based on the idea that certain rights are inherent to all people.
So not just grievances about taxes or British rule,
Yeah.
but a whole new philosophy of what government should be.
Precisely. They were invoking the concept of natural rights.
Okay.
Rights that exist independent of any government or law.
Interesting.
Think of it as rights that are so fundamental they can't be given or taken away.
Right.
This was pretty radical for the time.
I bet.
A direct challenge to the established order.
Wow. And this is where that iconic phrase comes in.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
It's become shorthand for the American ideal, right?
Absolutely.
Even today, centuries later,
Yeah.
we see it everywhere.
But it's interesting to think about how that ideal has been interpreted and reinterpreted over time.
Yeah.
The founding fathers, for all their brilliance, had a limited view of who is included in that all men are created equal statement.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how our understanding of those rights has evolved and the debates we're still having today about who those rights truly protect.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the Constitution. If the Declaration was the breakup, the Constitution's like figuring out how to live on your own.
Right.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, good.
The Constitution is where they get down to the nuts and bolts of building a government from scratch.
Sure.
And they knew they had to avoid the pitfalls of tyranny. They just fought a war to escape.
So how'd they go about doing that? What were some of the key innovations in the Constitution?
Well, first and foremost, they established the principle of separation of powers,
Okay.
dividing government authority between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches.
Makes sense.
Each branch has its own distinct role, preventing any one person or group from accumulating too much power.
So checks and balances are kind of like a safeguard
Exactly.
built right into the system.
It's all designed to ensure accountability and prevent abuses of power.
Right.
And then there's federalism,
Okay.
which divides powers between the federal government and the individual states.
Right. This was a way to accommodate the diverse interests and concerns of the different states while still creating a unified nation.
It's incredible how they managed to balance all of these competing interests and create a system that's lasted for centuries.
It is.
The source even mentions that the Constitution was designed to be adaptable, thanks to the amendment process.
Right. They knew they couldn't foresee every challenge or anticipate every future need.
Yeah.
So they built in a mechanism for the Constitution to evolve over time.
Okay.
To be amended and reinterpreted as society changed.
Which leads us perfectly to the Bill of Rights.
But before we jump into that,
Okay.
there's an important point we need to address about the Constitution.
Right.
It wasn't perfect.
Oh.
It included compromises that, from our perspective today, are deeply flawed.
You're talking about the 3/5 compromise, right?
Exactly.
Where enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of representation.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder of the limitations of their worldview and the ways in which their understanding of equality fell short of the ideals they espoused.
Right. Yeah. It's a tough reminder that even brilliant minds can make huge mistakes.
Yeah.
But like you said, the Constitution was designed to adapt.
Right.
And thankfully, that compromise was eventually overturned.
Right. It's a testament to the power of that amendment process. And that brings us to the Bill of Rights, which is essentially a list of fundamental rights that the government can't infringe upon.
So it's like they built in these extra protections, recognizing that even a well-designed government could still pose a threat to individual liberty.
Precisely. And these rights have been fiercely debated and defended over the centuries, shaping the very fabric of American society.
Let's dive into a few specific amendments
Okay.
that are especially relevant today.
Oh, right.
First up, the First Amendment.
Right.
The one everyone seems to have an opinion about.
Right. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and the right to petition the government.
Right.
It's like the bedrock of American democracy.
Yeah.
But it's also a constant source of controversy.
I mean, just look at the debates we're having now.
Yeah.
About social media, censorship, hate speech.
Right.
The spread of misinformation.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone's invoking the First Amendment these days.
It's a great example of how these rights are not static.
Right.
They're constantly being reinterpreted in light of new challenges. The Founding Fathers couldn't have imagined the internet or the complexities of modern communication.
Right.
So it's up to each generation to grapple with what these freedoms mean in our own time.
Yeah. And then there's the Second Amendment.
Right.
The right to bear arms.
Yeah.
Probably the most hotly debated amendment in the entire Constitution.
Absolutely. The ongoing gun control debate is a perfect example of how these centuries-old rights continue to spark passionate arguments.
Yeah.
The interpretation of the Second Amendment has evolved over time.
All right.
And it's a prime example of how these documents are living, breathing things.
Yeah.
Constantly subject to new scrutiny.
You know, it's interesting to think about the context in which these documents were written.
Yeah.
They were just coming out of a revolution, a time of immense upheaval and uncertainty.
Yeah.
It must have felt like they were building a nation from scratch with no guarantee of success.
Imagine the pressure they were under.
I know.
And yet they managed to create a framework that has, for the most part, endured for centuries.
Right.
It's a testament to their vision, but also to the inherent flexibility of the system they designed.
It makes you appreciate how much work goes into creating and maintaining a democracy.
Yeah.
It's not just about those founding documents. It's about the ongoing conversation, the debates, the constant struggle to live up to those ideals.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just looking at history.
Yeah.
We're engaging with ideas that are still shaping our world today.
It's like they're passing the torch to us, saying, here's what we came up with. Now it's your turn to figure out what it means.
Exactly. They gave us this incredible framework, but it's up to each generation to grapple with its complexities and figure out how to make it work, you know, in our own time.
And that's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because our understanding of we the people has broadened so much since the Founding Fathers' time.
Absolutely. The source even points out that the Founding Fathers themselves were a pretty homogenous group, elite white men.
Yeah.
Their worldview, while groundbreaking for its time, had its limitations.
So it makes you wonder whose voices were missing from those early debates, whose perspectives might have changed the course of history if they'd been included.
That's a question worth pondering, and it brings us to a crucial point.
Okay.
The work of building a more perfect union is never truly finished. Each generation has to wrestle with these foundational documents, interpret them anew, and find ways to make them more inclusive and representative of the diverse tapestry of American society.
It's like those documents are a starting point, not an end point.
Right.
They give us a foundation, but it's up to us to keep building on it.
Precisely. And that's what makes these texts so powerful, so relevant even centuries later.
Yeah.
They invite us into an ongoing conversation about what it means to be American, what rights we cherish, and how we balance individual liberty with the needs of a functioning society.
So to bring it all back to you, our listener, what stood out to you in this deep dive? What resonates with you most about these foundational documents?
And even more importantly, how do you see these principles playing out in your own life, in your community, in the broader world?
Because these aren't just abstract ideas. They have real-world consequences. They shape the laws we live by, the debates we have, the very fabric of our society.
So as you go about your day, as you encounter news stories or engage in conversations about current events, keep these foundational documents in mind.
Think about the legacy of the Founding Fathers, both the brilliant and the flawed.
And ask yourself, how can we, in the 21st century, continue the work of building a more perfect union, a society that truly lives up to the ideals of liberty and justice for all?
That's a powerful question to leave you with. Until next time, keep diving.